You've found your way here again. Maybe it's late. Maybe it's early. Maybe time has folded in on itself like rising dough. Wherever you are, and whenever this moment reaches you, welcome. If you're cozy, under blankets, tucked into a quiet room, or just trying to hush your thoughts one by one, like monks closing books for the night, this space is yours now. And it is a soft one. We won't be galloping through wars or decoding royal scandals tonight. No swords, no court intrigues, no maps of conquest. Instead, we'll be drifting gently into a monastery. And not just any monastery, but one filled with ovens, flower-dusted robes, and a strange, forgotten language. The language of bread. More specifically, the quiet art of marking loaves with symbols, stamps, and signs, in silence and for centuries. Because before bakeries had brand logos, and long before gluten-free was a battlefield, monks across Europe were carving entire systems of meaning into their bread crusts. Each slash and stamp meant something. Who the bread was for, what it contained, whether it was meant for healing, fasting, feasting, or charity. Some of these marks were practical, others, well, just mysterious. And together, they whisper a story lost in the cracks of crust and crumb. A story not often told. So tonight, let's tell it. But slowly, gently, with pauses for the scent of yeast and the hush of rising dough. Before we begin, if you find comfort in these sleepy wanderings through forgotten history, you might consider gently pressing the subscribe button, or tapping that like icon like a monk pressing a stamp into proofed dough. It helps us stay here, quietly curious, wonderfully unhurried. And feel free to leave a comment with your location and local time. It's always lovely to know where in the world people are falling asleep to 12th century flower rituals. Now then, the bell is ringing. Let's ease into tonight's journey. You hear it first, not loudly, but clearly. One bell. Then another, softer, echoing through stone cloisters like warm water trickling through a clay cup. It is the call to the bakery. Yes, there are many calls here, to prayer, to meals, to silence. But this one belongs to bread. You walk the path from your small guest cell, sandals brushing against flagstone, the early morning air cool and damp with the promise of heat from the ovens. The monastery is old. You can tell by the way the walls no longer apologize for their cracks, by the way the garden grows with purpose, not aesthetics, by how even the silence feels aged, like it's been passed down through generations of quiet men who knew that bread could be both scripture and survival. This isn't the grand kind of abbey with golden altars and walls full of relics. This one's tucked in a damp hillside, humble and fragrant with rosemary and ash. The bakery is a small stone room on the eastern side, where morning light leaks through latticed windows. And already, the scent draws you closer. A smell like warm grain, sweet yeast, and scorched history. You step inside. The bakery is simple. 2 long tables, 1 wide hearth, wood stacked in a neat, judgmental pile that says someone takes their kindling seriously. And at the far end, 2 monks work in silence. They knead without conversation, move without instruction. Their robes are ghosted with flour, their fingers stained with proofing dough. One looks up. He nods. And somehow that small nod says, "I see you. I know you haven't done this before, but that's all right. You'll learn." He gestures to a bench near the fire. You sit, and for a long moment you do nothing at all, just Observe. Dough rises quietly in wooden bowls, each covered with linen cloths that look older than most countries. There's no rush, no timers, just instinct and tradition, and a sunbeam that has clearly claimed one corner of the room as its holy jurisdiction. Then you notice something odd. Each of the resting loaves, round, soft, slightly trembling from the fermentation, bears a mark. Some scored with knives, others pressed with carved stamps. One has a simple cross, another a scallop shell. A third, more elaborate, shows a looping spiral enclosed in a square frame. You look to the monk. He follows your gaze, then picks up a wooden press from the table and turns it over in his hand. A spiral carved into it. Elegant, worn, reverent. This one, he says softly, is for the infirmary. He places it back down, as if the explanation were obvious. You blink. He elaborates. It means the bread has honey and ground flax, gentle on the belly, meant for the sick, easier to digest. You lean forward. The bread has a language? He nods again, then points across the bench, where other stamps are laid out like tiny relics. A circle, bisected. A triangle with dots. An open palm. An animal paw. A fish. Each one used for a different kind of loaf. Each mark, a quiet message. Some of them practical. Some spiritual. Some, perhaps, just personal. You realize you've stumbled not just into a bakery, but into a lexicon. And that's when the monk says something that will stay with you all morning. Even the crust carries meaning.
The bench you sit on is warm now, made that way not by fire but by presence, a gentle heat that seems to have seeped into the wood from years of monks resting their thoughts while the bread rose. In front of you, the table is cluttered with the quiet tools of edible theology. 2 loaves sit near your elbow, still raw, pale with flour, their surfaces soft and scored. One has a triple line crossing the center. The other bears a mark like a sunflower, radiating from the center outwards in small, equal bursts. The monk returns with a cloth bundle. He unties it slowly, like someone opening a letter they've read before, a dozen times, always carefully. Inside are wooden stamps. Some round, some square, some oddly shaped, none without wear. The grooves are smoothed from use, the edges darkened by decades of handling. You can smell the faint oil of use on them, linseed perhaps, and something older, something like smoke and reverence. He places them on the table, one by one. You lean closer. Each stamp has a unique design, a spiral, a fish, a cross, but not the Latin kind. This one has equal arms, the kind used in early Christian mosaics. There's one with a scallop shell, another with 7 dots in a ring. One, oddly enough, has the sun and a crescent moon carved together. You raise an eyebrow. He catches it. That one, he says, tapping the moon and sun, is for the equinox bread. We only make it twice a year. The dough is light, with orange peel and a touch of anise. Sweet, but not too proud of itself. You stifle a smile. The monk's humor is soft, like a loaf just before the oven. He continues. Each mark means something. To us, to the kitchen, to the receiver. He picks up the stamp with the triple line. This one means feast. 3 lines. Body, soul, spirit. Used only on celebration days. You nod. And the sunflower? That's the mark for the poor. Not because it looks like a gift, though it does, but because sunflowers turn to the light. It's a reminder that giving should always follow the sun. He doesn't need to say more. The meaning blooms in the quiet. He gestures toward the oven, where other loaves now rest inside on flat stones, crusting into scripture. We used to write more with ink, he says, scribes, scrolls. But flour speaks too, in its own way. The concept of bread as text doesn't strike you as strange anymore. In fact, it begins to feel obvious, inevitable. In a place where silence is revered, where words are measured like rare spices, of course bread would bear the messages too large for speech. You ask how old the practice is. He shrugs. Older than me, perhaps not older than Benedict. Historians disagree. Some say it came from Roman bakers' marks. They stamped the loaves to avoid theft. Others say it began with the desert monks who saw visions in the shapes of the daily crust. He smiles, knowingly. I think it's both, the practical and the poetic, like most things that last. You nod slowly. The bench creaks as he leans back, hands resting on his knees. For a long moment, there's only the crackle of the fire and the slow, rhythmic sighs of rising bread. He points to another stamp. This one is a fish, simple and rounded. Pilgrim bread, marked so it could be blessed and given at the roadside. Durable loaves, hard crusts, meant to be carried long distances, often baked twice. He pauses. Some were made hollow inside, to hide coins or small scrolls. You raise both eyebrows this time. Truly. He nods. One pilgrim claimed he carried a relic of St. Bartholomew inside a loaf all the way to Iberia. He chuckles softly, though I suspect it was only his lunch. You smile. The warmth here is not just from the oven. It's in the way stories rise. You ask about the crescent mark. Fasting bread. For Lent. Simple dough. No fat. Sometimes made with chestnut flour or dried peas. That mark warned the kitchen. No honey, no luxury. You begin to notice the rhythm to it all. Bread is not just food. It is calendar. It is medicine. It is offering and reminder and quiet sermon. Some marks are even warnings. This one, he says, lifting a stamp with 2 slashes and a dot, means the flour was coarse, rough grain, usually milled after a flood or a poor harvest. It's edible but not ideal. We mark it so the young brothers know to chew slowly. You marvel at the care, the transparency, the honesty in saying, this is what we have and here is what it means. He tops one last stamp, a single thumbprint, deep, deliberate. This one, he says, is my favorite. It means given in silence. You ask when it's used. For the offerings left at the guest door. Anonymous bread. No explanation, no request. Just a gesture. A way of saying, I see you, without saying anything at all. You let out a breath you didn't know you were holding. Outside, a dove coos in the courtyard. The monk begins to gather the stamps again, wrapping them in the cloth like sacred tools, not precious, just respected, held with understanding. The loaves in the oven crack once, sharply, as steam escapes from a finished crust. We read them, he says, gesturing toward the baking bread, even when we eat them, especially then. He looks at you. You will too, after today. And somehow, you know he's right. Once you know the language of bread marks, the crust never goes quiet again. It speaks, in flour, in fire, in every bite. And now, so softly you might miss it. It speaks to you.
You awaken the next morning, not to bells this time, but to warmth. The kind of warmth that sneaks in quietly, like a cat at the foot of the bed. Soft, not insistent, just present. The sun hasn't fully risen, but the bakery already breathes with life. You hear the muffled shuffling of sandals over stone, the low murmur of 2 monks discussing flour weight in a tone usually reserved for prayer, and the periodic thump of dough meeting wood. You stretch, gently, unsure if you've slept for 7 hours or 70 years. Time moves oddly in places like this. It doesn't march, it steeps. You rise, wrap yourself in a borrowed woolen shawl, and head once more toward the cloistered oven room. This time, the door is already open.
Inside, the air is fragrant and bustling in the slowest way possible. There's activity, yes, but it's deliberate, calm, like a symphony composed entirely of pauses. One monk is scooping ashes from the hearth. Another is dusting long wooden peels with flour. A third is holding a bowl of soaked grains, murmuring a short verse over it, as though even oats benefit from encouragement. Today, you're not just a guest. You're helping. Well, helping is a generous word. You've been assigned the role of watching the flour not blow away. But it's enough. You're seated near a wide table, its surface etched with knife scores and smoothed by time. On it rests a mound of fresh dough, massive, alive, breathing gently under a cloth like a small animal in slumber. The monk beside you, Brother Rayner, is shaping loaves. His hands move with grace that only comes from routine. Flatten, fold, turn, press. It's meditative, almost hypnotic. You feel your own breath start to match the pace of the kneading. Then comes the marking. From a drawer, Brother Rayner removes a stamp, this one circular, with a tiny carved figure in the middle. You squint. A lamb? Paschal bread, he says, made for Holy Week, only once a year. He presses the stamp into the center of a round loaf, and the lamb appears in soft relief, its form gentle but certain. You glance at a second table where other loaves are resting beneath linen shrouds. Each bears a different symbol. One a cross, another a looping vine, a third with 5 dots in a circle. Do you remember what these mean? He asks. You hesitate, then point. The cross, feast day. The vine, wine-soaked loaves. And the dots, for the novices. He grins. Close. The vine is for shared meals in the garden, symbol of community. The dots are fasting bread, but not strict fast. Think of it as modestly boring. You smile. In another corner of the room, a monk arranges finished loaves into baskets. Each is wrapped in cloth, not just for warmth or storage, but reverence. Bread isn't just food here. It's offering, message, sacrament. The monastery once served as a pilgrimage stop, small, quiet, nestled between greater paths. Many of these loaves were once handed to travelers, not with words, just with marks. A fish for a pilgrim, a scallop shell for a guest bound for Santiago, a simple circle, completeness for someone recently returned. You're told of one curious tradition, bread for lost voices. During certain liturgies, loaves were stamped with an open mouth and left anonymously on a stone altar. No one ever explained why. Historians still debate whether it was a prayer for those who had died suddenly or perhaps a monastic protest in carbohydrate form. You're also told of a rule: only those with clean hands and a peaceful heart could shape bread for the sick. If one held bitterness, it was said the loaves would burn. Is that folklore or policy? Brother Rayner shrugs. Possibly both. Either way, it kept the peace. The oven is ready now. You watch as the door is opened with a long iron hook. Heat rushes out, humid and ancient, like a breath from the earth itself. One by one, the loaves are placed inside. Their marks glow briefly in the firelight before the crusts begin to darken. The next batch is prepared, this time with a different stamp. You're handed one, a small oval with a carved tree. What does this one mean, you ask? Brother Rayner pauses, a touch nostalgic. Resilience. It's used in spring after harsh winters. It means we are still here. You hold it a moment longer than necessary. There's something profound about that, placing quiet declarations into dough. No speeches, no sermons. Just bread that says, "We endured." You press the stamp into a waiting loaf. The dough yields. The tree appears. It feels like writing, a soft kind of authorship. Another monk returns with a fresh bowl of flour. You're invited to sift. It's soothing work, the flour falling like snowfall through your fingers. "Did you ever eat unmarked bread?" you ask, curiously. "Once," Brother Rayner replies. "When we ran out of oil during the war, no one stamped the loaves. They felt empty, like letters without envelopes." You realize the marks aren't just labels, they're emotion, memory, ritual. Even the shape of the bread tells a story. Round for unity, oval for mourning, square for festivals, stacked in fours to symbolize the Gospels. The monastery even had whisper loaves, thin, delicate rounds marked only with a single dot. Baked during vows of silence, eaten without breaking quiet. If that's not poetic carbohydrate, what is? Outside, the bells ring for midday prayer. Inside, the bakery quiets. Loaves rise in sacred rhythm. You sit back down, the heat still brushing your skin, the flour dusting your sleeves, the language of bread slowly etching itself into your memory. You wonder what kind of loaf you might be if you were bread. Maybe one with a spiral, winding, unsure, or a crescent, made for reflection. Brother Rayner watches your thoughts and offers a final stamp for the day. It's blank. You tilt your head. "This one," he says, "is used when the meaning is still unfolding." You understand, and gently you press it into dough.
There is a path behind the monastery. It isn't much, just a soft, worn ribbon of dirt winding past the herb garden through a narrow wooden gate and into the golden quiet of the surrounding fields. You walk it now, that mid-afternoon, your feet padding gently over the compacted soil. There's no breeze, only the occasional rustle of a bird deciding not to be seen. The sun hangs in the air like a thought that refuses to settle. Ahead, you see it, the monastery mill. It sits at the edge of a slow-moving stream, where water turns a moss-covered wheel with the kind of patience only monasteries and rivers understand. The building is older than most of the abbey, its stone walls slouched inward like an old monk leaning over his psalter. A monk, Brother Odilo, is waiting for you there. He raises a hand in greeting, then turns and gestures for you to follow him inside the mill. The interior smells of wood, grain, and thyme. It is both dusty and comforting, like a library made of wheat. The grindstone sits at the center, massive and humming with slow energy. You can hear the steady groan of gears, the whir of the wheel outside, the faint chatter of grain becoming flour. Brother Odilo doesn't speak at first. He simply picks up a handful of barley from a sack, lets it fall between his fingers like sand, and watches you. "You know bread," he says, "but do you know grain?" You offer a hesitant shrug. He nods. "That's all right. That's where everyone starts." He explains the different grains used at the monastery. There's wheat, of course, used for feast bread, soft and airy. Barley, for the poor, dense, humble, filling. Spelt, used during fasts. Oats, for the infirm. Sometimes rye, but only when the weather is bad or the grain broker's generous. He leads you to a smaller room where dried herbs hang in bunches from the ceiling. Lavender, rosemary, sage. "These," he says, "are added to special loaves." You ask why. He smiles. "Because even monks enjoy flavor. We're solemn, not joyless. There's a ledger on the table beside a sack of flour. The parchment is curled, the ink faded. It's a flour log. Each entry carefully notes the grain, the mixture, the season, the humidity, the amount milled. Some monks wrote their dreams in journals, and others wrote their flour. You can't help but find that oddly moving. You trail a finger along the log. One entry catches your eye. July 9th, year of our Lord 1243. Barley, 2 course. Stamp with thorns. You ask about that last part. He says it was a cautionary mark. A warning. The bread would scratch the throat if swallowed too quickly. You blink. That's considerate? More overly dramatic, he admits. The monks liked metaphors. Another entry, written in a different hand, mixed with chickpea flour today. Curious. Must consult the abbot. The scribbled note beside it. He approves, cautiously. You stifle a chuckle. There's something endearing about the bureaucracy of bread. Brother Odilo leads you to the grain bins. They're enormous, built into the floor, lined with smooth wood. One is filled with wheat, another with cracked rye, a third is empty, but carries a faint scent of buckwheat and rain. You ask how they decide which grain to use each week. He gives a monkish shrug. Prayer, weather, availability, and occasionally, whim. You picture a council of monks debating the emotional properties of millet. Sometimes they consult the stars, he says. You pause. Really? Once, he admits. It didn't end well. We milled under Mercury retrograde. Half the loaves collapsed in on themselves. He's joking. Probably. You learn that each grain has its own stamp, too. Not just the bread, but the sack itself. Barley is marked with a small downward arrow. Oats get a crescent moon. Wheat, a cross within a circle. These marks are pressed into wax seals tied around the bags. It's not for show, he explains. It keeps us honest. If a sack was mislabeled, the consequences could be binding. You raise an eyebrow. There's a rule, he continues, that you must never pretend a feast loaf is humble, nor humble for feast. The stamp ensures truth. You let that settle. The flour here isn't just measured in weight, it's measured in purpose. He leads you outside again. The sun is low now. The field glows amber. Somewhere, a goat makes a sound of profound dissatisfaction. Odilo picks up a stone near the mill door and hands it to you. It's small and smooth, with a faint mark chiseled into it. A star. You ask what it means. That one was used for blessing the grain before the grind, pressed once into the first handful of each batch. A reminder. Of what? That all bread begins as seed, and all seeds need care. You place it back. And then you ask the question that's been quietly bubbling inside you since yesterday. Did anyone ever mark the bread with nothing? No sign at all. Odilo grows quiet. He leans against the mill wall and thinks. Once a year, he says slowly, during Holy Saturday. He explains that after the silence of Good Friday, the bread baked on Saturday bore no mark, no sign, just plain crust. The loaves were left in the chapel, unspoken, undecorated, a gesture of emptiness, of waiting. You think about that. How absence, too, can speak. Back at the bakery, you imagine those blank loaves sitting beside the others, humble, unadorned, like a held breath. The wind rustles the tall grass. The mill wheel creaks, steady as ever. You walk back slowly, the day stretched behind you like dough on a floured board. And somewhere in your pocket, a single oat has hitched a ride.
By now, you've spent 2 mornings in the warmth of the oven room. You've sifted flour, watched symbols press into dough like old secrets, breathed in the sacred scent of barley kissed by fire. And still, you've only seen a handful of monks. This monastery, it seems, has a population far greater than the 2 or 3 flower-covered men humming psalms near the peel boards. So where are the others? After breakfast, plain porridge, a slice of last night's marked bread, and something that might have once been an apple, you take a quiet walk along the northern corridor. The hall stretches long and shadowed, with stone walls that seem to have grown tired of holding themselves up. Everything here leans gently toward rest. You pass a few cells with open wooden doors, a soft creak, a rustle of parchment. Somewhere, a quill scratches its thoughts into eternity. And then you hear it. Not bells, not birds, but humming. Low, wordless humming, drifting like smoke from behind a half-closed door. You pause, peer inside, and find a monk not with dough, but with ink. Brother Anselm. He sits at a wooden desk, surrounded by scrolls and bound volumes, his fingers stained not with flour, but with ink and beeswax. He glances up, mildly surprised, not bothered, just surprised that someone would interrupt the rhythm of letters and vellum. "Ah, you're the one who thinks bread is just crust and crumbs." You grin. "I'm learning otherwise." He nods. Good, it's a deep well. On his desk lies an open manuscript, a catalogue of marks, each symbol carefully drawn, annotated in Latin, some familiar from the oven room, others entirely new. You point to one, a flame surrounded by a ring. "That," he says, "is the mark for vigil bread, eaten at night during long prayers." "And this one?" you ask, indicating a triangle within a square. "Bread for funerals, given to mourners who couldn't find words." You stare a moment longer. Then a more daring question. "Why aren't you in the bakery?" He chuckles softly, "Because someone has to remember the meanings." You learn that Brother Anselm is the monastery's notarius panis, the bread notary, a title you did not expect to exist, but it does. His job isn't to bake, it's to witness, to record each mark, each variation, each shift in custom or flour blend or spiritual intent. When the monastery experimented with time-infused barley loaves in 1271, he wrote it down. When a novice accidentally created a double-stamped bread during a thunderstorm, resulting in what they called blessed confusion, also written down. His parchment holds centuries of crust-based communication. He unrolls a scroll so long it nearly trails onto the floor. "Here," he says, "these are the marks retired over the years." Retired marks. You blink. "Oh yes," he continues, "some were used only for brief seasons, a drought year, a long Lent, a visiting archbishop with peculiar dietary preferences." You scan the list. One symbol is a broken ring with 3 dots. "That," he says, "was the famine mark, used when we had to stretch flour with ground peas. The bread was bitter, no one liked it, but we kept the record." You ask if any marks were forbidden. He grows quiet, then nods. "There were symbols we decided were better left unused." He doesn't elaborate,
You don't press. But he hands you a different scroll, this one newer, still drying at the edges. These are the imagined marks. Imagined? He smiles. Not all marks were used. Some were proposed, pondered, dreamed of. You unfurl the scroll. A spiral within a crescent. A sun with no rays. A hand holding a grain. They were made during the years the harvest was too bountiful, when we had time to invent. You pause at one that shows a loaf breaking open with stars rising from it. What was this one meant for? Hope, he says. It was never used, but it was beautiful. You let the scroll fall back into place. In the corner of his room, you notice something that looks almost modern, a stack of loaves, sculpted in clay, marked and labeled. These, he says, are the reference loaves for teaching. He picks one up, square, flat, marked with a symbol you can't quite place. It looks like a flower in winter. For grief softened by time, he says. You ask how many people still understand this language. Very few. But it's not about comprehension. It's about presence. He leans back, eyes distant. You know, there are monks who never baked a loaf of bread in their lives, but who spent decades studying its meaning. Bread is not just made in the oven. It's made in the mind. You nod, slowly, uncertain whether you've been initiated or merely invited. As you leave his chamber, he calls out gently. Oh, and one more thing. If you invent your own mark, draw it somewhere no one will look. That's how the best ones begin.
You've been at the monastery for 5 days now, and if the loaves have taught you anything, it's this. Even crumbs have a place. So it shouldn't surprise you that one of the most beloved days in the monastery calendar is, in fact, devoted to them. Crumbs. Not saints, not relics, not theological disputes written in dense Latin, just crumbs. You learn about it the way you learn most things here, accidentally, and from someone passing by with a basket. Brother Theo, a monk with flour permanently tucked into the creases of his smile, mentions it while adjusting his robes. "Big day tomorrow," he mutters, balancing 3 loaves on one arm. "Festival of the crumbs." You pause. "Of the crumbs?" He nods, without elaborating, as though that should be enough to make perfect sense. Later, you ask Brother Rayner what exactly happens during this festival. He explains with the tone of someone trying not to laugh. It began centuries ago as a cleanup ritual. Every baker's bench and board swept, crumb bins emptied, the ovens cleared. You raise an eyebrow. That's it? Just tidying? Well, you know monks. They can't do anything halfway. Eventually, it became symbolic. He goes on. The crumbs, once seen as waste, came to represent the overlooked, the forgotten, the humble things that fed the soul in quiet. It's a reminder, he adds, that nothing sacred is too small. You nod, because honestly, that feels like a good motto for life. The next morning, the air carries a different energy, not bustling, but hushed, anticipatory. You wake early, dress simply, and follow the scent of toasted grain. In the cloister yard, tables have been set up. Not grand, not decorated, just rows of wooden planks covered in linen cloths. Upon each rests a different kind of bread, but in fragments. Slivers, bits, halves, broken corners, heels of loaves that never made it to the table. And each piece is labeled. You walk past one with a card that reads, "Fast bread, Lent, 1189. Another, "Charity loaf, Cold Spring, year of thin barley." Another, "Novice mistake, double salted, still eaten." There's a warmth to it, like a family gathering around an old photo album, where even the burned crusts and uneven cuts are remembered fondly. Brother Anselm has brought out the scrolls again, pointing quietly to each fragment and its corresponding entry in the ledger. Some monks read aloud the old annotations. One, quite serious, says, October 1420, loaf fell from peel, landed upright, interpreted as a sign. You glance at Brother Theo. He whispers, "It wasn't." A group of young novices sweep crumbs from the cloisters into woven baskets. They move slowly, reverently, like they're collecting sacred dust. And in a way they are. These crumbs are gathered not for disposal, but for scattering. You follow the procession out to the garden. Here, among the bees and overgrown rosemary, the monks form a gentle circle. A basket of crumbs is passed from hand to hand. One by one, they toss pinches into the wind or gently press them into the soil near young plants. A quiet voice reads, "Blessed be the small, the cracked, the crumbled, the corner piece, the one you almost didn't choose." There's a pause. Then the final line, spoken by an elder monk with a voice like slow thunder. "Even the least loaf fed someone." You feel a strange ache in your chest. Not sorrow exactly, just softness. Later, back in the bakery, a small ritual unfolds. From a jar tucked into a high shelf, Brother Rayner retrieves the crumb stamp, used only once a year. It's tiny, just the outline of a single grain, and it's pressed into the day's loaves, not in the center, not loudly, but tucked at the edge. A mark that says, "I see the small things." Each monk receives a slice at supper, and silence is kept while it's eaten. No fanfare, no speeches, just the sound of chewing, the occasional satisfied sigh, and the crinkle of crust giving way to memory. You think of the marks you've seen, spirals, palms, stars, flames, and realize that this one, the smallest, might say the most. Because in the end, the crumbs remain. They're what's left after the feast. The quiet proof that something once nourished you. The evidence of presence. And perhaps that's why this strange, humble festival exists. Not to honor the grand, but to say thank you, even to the pieces. That night, as the wind picks up through the old windows of the guest cell, you find a single crumb in your pocket. You leave it there, not by accident, but because you finally understand what it means.
By now, your feet know the path to the bakery by instinct. You could walk it half asleep, which, frankly, you often are. But today, Brother Odilo intercepts you just as you pass the cloister fountain, a sleepy arrangement of mossy stone, trickling like a monk who's lost his train of thought mid-prayer. He beckons with a finger crooked like an old tree branch and says simply, "Come, today you'll see where we keep the old ones." You blink, thinking, retired monks? No, loaves. This monastery has a bread archive. Of course it does. He leads you down a spiral staircase beneath the main hall, into the cool underbelly of the abbey. The air grows still, dusty, cold in that way that makes your nose twitch, but your thoughts slow. There's a corridor ahead, lit by slits of morning light from high-up vents. And there, behind a heavy door with a carved wheat stalk for a handle, lies the loaf library. It's real. It's not a metaphor, not a joke, not a quiet nod to some philosophical concept. No, it's a room filled with old loaves of bread. Preserved, dried, varnished, labeled, documented. Each sits on its own little wooden plinth, beneath a glass bell or inside a wax-sealed case, like relics in a museum. Except instead of bones or jewels, you're staring at crust. One loaf, dark and squat, is labeled Feast of St. Alban, 1193, marked with double halo, preserved due to incident with goat. Another, barely more than a shard, reads, Emergency Lenten bread, no salt, no oil, carried 47 miles in secret. Brother Odilo gestures toward a row of shelves. This section contains votive loaves, never eaten, left in chapels, later dried for record. You spot one loaf etched with the words, Domine, ego non sum dignus, Lord, I am not worthy. The crust cracked during baking, as if the loaf itself had some doubts. Further on, a surprisingly delicate bread rests in a long box. This one, he says, was baked to commemorate a novice's first reading. The mark? A book, flanked by 2 ears of wheat. Simple. Perfect. You ask if the monks ever study these loaves the way scholars study old texts. He nods. Sometimes to revive a tradition, sometimes to retire one. You learn that every year a new mark is chosen to reflect the monastery's state of spirit. This decision is not taken lightly, and often the monks look to the archive for guidance. Last year we revived the Ring of Thorns for reflection. It hadn't been used since the drought of 1381. You pass another shelf, this one more artistic. One loaf is triangular, marked with waves. Storm bread, he says, baked for sailors before a sea blessing. Another is stamped with the symbol of 2 clasped hands. Reconciliation loaf, Odilo adds. Rare, only baked after quarrels. You notice a smaller, oddly lopsided loaf at the very end. It's unmarked, just plain crust, uneven and slumped. This one, Odilo says almost reverently, was the final loaf baked by Brother Armand. He was going blind, didn't press a mark, said he'd rather leave it open. You pause. Sometimes blankness isn't a mistake, it's a statement. You sit for a while on a small bench tucked beneath a shelf. The loaf library isn't grand, it doesn't smell like books or parchment. It smells of age, flour, and wood smoke long since faded. But it holds memory differently. Here, history isn't written, it's baked. Brother Odilo pulls a leather-bound volume from a nearby cabinet, the Register of Crusts. Of course it does. He flips it open to a random page, a sketch of a loaf marked with what looks like a tiny ladder. For monks climbing out of despair, he says, almost smiling. You look up, wide-eyed. Was that a common request? He shrugs. Despair is persistent. So are we. Another page shows a loaf shaped like a bell. Used to be gifted to those returning to the monastery after long absences. It made a soft clink when tapped. You know, Odilo muses, I think we understand people better through their bread than through their letters. You nod slowly. Bread doesn't exaggerate. It doesn't flatter. It simply reveals who needed feeding. As you prepare to leave, he points to a shelf with one last loaf, fresh, still soft, still warm. Today's bread, unmarked, not yet archived. A small label sits blank beside it, waiting to be written. He hands you a pen. You blink. Me? Go on, he says. Describe what it fed. You think. You write, given to a guest, eaten slowly, left some crumbs, took some peace. He nods and places it beneath the bell jar.
It's nearly your 7th day at the monastery. You now instinctively bow your head slightly at passing monks, eat without expectation of spice, and no longer jump when the evening bell echoes through the stone halls like a gentle sigh from a giant who's finally gone to bed. But this morning, there's a new note of stillness in the air. Not the usual hush of routine or prayerful quiet. This one is deeper, softer, intentional. Brother Rayner, with his flour-dusted habit and permanently raised eyebrow, greets you with a finger to his lips. He doesn't speak, just gestures toward the refectory where a note is pinned beside the door. It reads, "Today, the silence rule. Whisper only if you must. Let the loaves do the talking." Right, of course. The silence rule. You've heard whispers of it, ironically enough, in previous days. a centuries-old custom observed sporadically throughout the year. The bakery remains open, the work continues, but all recipes, instructions, and communications must be whispered, or better, mimed. The theory is simple. Bread made without chatter carries a deeper humility. The reality is more interpretive. You step into the bakery and are immediately greeted by 3 monks silently arguing over which flour bin to use, using only eyebrows, dramatic sighs, and something that looks like interpretive dance. It's delightful. Brother Theo waves you over and hands you a handwritten note. Today, herb loaves. Sage, rosemary, and thyme. No basil. Brother Felix ate it. You nod solemnly, as though this is a deep and tragic loss. The kitchen feels like a cathedral of gestures. One monk points to a bowl, mimics pouring, then performs a small flourish to indicate gently. Another traces a spiral in the flour on the table, an old way to say mix clockwise. Brother Odilo, never one to be subtle, holds up a loaf dramatically and makes a large X with his arms. Apparently someone tried to double the salt again. You catch the eye of Brother Anselm, standing off to the side, watching the scene like a theater critic who once acted but now prefers quiet critique. He beckons you over with a crook of his finger and leads you to the scriptorium turned temporary recipe chamber. Here, on a long wooden table, rest dozens of folded slips of parchment. Each bears a whisper of a recipe. No full instructions, no measurements, just fragments, riddles, really. You pick one up. A loaf for remembering. Use rye, add 3 seeds, 1 forgotten, bake with lid closed. Another reads, thrice turned dough, 2 hands only, mark it with the sign of patience. You glance at Anselm, who only raises his eyebrow as if to say, don't ask me, I just copy them. Apparently, these whispered recipes are older than any single monk here, passed along during silence days for centuries, interpreted differently each time. You take one with a soft smudge of ash on the edge and bring it back to the bakery. Brother Rayner reads it and nods, then hands you a bowl. You're in. The work is quiet, yes, but also strangely intimate. Every movement is observed, every motion intentional. You measure flour not with a cup, but with a sense of weight in your palm. Water is poured by feel, not number. A pinch of herbs, then another, not too much, the kind of measuring done with the eyes closed. The dough takes shape under hands that rarely rush. And once the loaves are molded, they're marked not with the usual wooden stamps, but with fingertips. 3 dots in a triangle, a swirl made with the side of the thumb, a leaf pressed gently into the center. Each one different, each one a response to a recipe that didn't quite say what to do. The silence allows you to notice things you missed before. How Brother Felix hums through his nose when he kneads. How the oven's exhale sounds almost like a sigh of relief when a loaf slides in. How the dust of flour moves in slow spirals in the sunlight, like tiny galaxies born from grain. There's no rush, not today. Even the oven obeys the rhythm. Bread emerges with deeper color, crusts crackled with quiet wisdom. You break one open, steam curls upward. The scent, earthy, herbal, warm, smells like forgiveness. At mealtime, the monks gather in the refectory and sit in shared hush. Each loaf is passed gently, reverently, no words, but then a few monks begin to hum. Softly, one tone. Then another joins. and another. No lyrics, no song, just a harmony, held lightly, like a bowl of warm soup in the hands. You chew your slice slowly, the herbs unfolding on your tongue in waves. Sage for memory, thyme for courage, rosemary for love unspoken, and basil, still gone, still blamed for Brother Felix. That evening, as the sun slips over the edge of the hills, you find a slip of parchment tucked near your guest bed. It reads, "Some recipes aren't meant to be explained. They're meant to be listened to. In flower, in silence, in touch." You fold it, place it in your bag, and promise to try one day, wherever you are, to make a bread that whispers.
The wind shifts this morning. It comes in low and lazy through the eastern windows, carrying the scent of wild herbs from the hills and the faint brine of distant sea air. Something about it feels expectant, as though the day might decide to teach you something without asking your permission. At breakfast, you notice a monk sitting apart from the others, not excluded, just deliberately distant. He chews slowly, thoughtfully, and once finished, places his crusts in a tidy triangle on his wooden tray. You ask Brother Theo about him. "Ah," he says, with a softness unusual even for him. "That's Brother Miro. He used to run the bakery." You blink. "I've never seen him there." Theo nods. "Not since the accident." You hesitate. "What happened?" But Theo only shrugs, not unkindly, just enough to say, "The story belongs to someone else." So, after the midday bell and a short nap, because monasteries, it turns out, are exceptionally nap-friendly, you wander to the small cloister garden behind the script room. And there he is, Brother Miro, sitting on a bench beside an unruly rosemary bush, carving something gently with his good hand. His other sleeve is folded neatly, pinned just above the elbow. He sees you, nods once, and gestures to the bench beside him. You sit. For a while there's nothing but the sound of the knife moving through wood, slow, patient, a rhythm like breathing. Eventually he speaks. "You like the bread here?" You nod. "It tastes like time." He smiles, just a little. "I used to be the fast one, always trying to shave 5 minutes off the rise, get the ovens lit sooner, speed through shaping like it was a race." You glance at his hand. He catches the look and nods. "It was the kneading hook, snapped from the beam. My fault, too much pride, not enough inspection." A quiet falls again. Then he hands you the piece of wood that he's been carving. It's a tiny bread stamp, a swirl within a square with a faint crack carved across it, like a hairline fracture. You ask what it means. He shrugs. "Recovery." You ask if he ever thought of leaving. He looks surprised. "No," he says, "I just had to start again. I couldn't knead with 2 hands, but I could shape with 1. Slowly. Differently." You learn that he now teaches novices, not baking, not theory, patience. When they mess up a loaf, they come to me. We make something strange out of it, lopsided, misshapen. We mark it with a star, and we eat it together. He laughs softly. "I've eaten more mistakes than anyone here, and honestly, they're delicious." You ask if he still makes marks. "Only by memory," he replies. He pulls a scrap of cloth from his robe pocket, unfolds it. Inside are tiny imprints, his personal stamp collection. Each carved since the accident, some shaky, some clean. "This one," he says, pointing to one shaped like a flame inside a cup, "is for grief that's already cooled." "And this?" you ask. touching a spiral that disappears into itself? That's for starting again when you're not ready. You look at the collection, dozens of them, more than anyone else's you've seen. Did you use these? He shakes his head. No, I give them away. When someone's ready, they choose one, not to use on bread, just to keep. You pause, then ask what people usually pick. He grins. Almost always the same one. This. He holds up a tiny triangle with a chip missing at the top. For imperfection, he says. Seems to resonate. The silence between you feels soft, like dough rising somewhere nearby. Then, quietly, he says, "Do you want to try?" He pulls out another blank piece of wood, hands you a small carving knife. No instructions, no guidance, just trust. You start slowly, cautiously, every slice awkward but earnest. The knife skips once, leaves a small scar. You keep going. Eventually, you end up with something strange. Uneven. A circle with a tiny dot in one corner. You have no idea what it means. But Miro takes it from you gently, runs his thumb over the ridges. He nods. This one's for uncertainty. You both smile. That evening, you return to your room and tuck the stamp into your satchel. You don't know if you'll ever use it, but you know you'll never forget how it felt to make it. Bread, after all, isn't just about flour and water. Sometimes it's about learning to shape the world with what you have left.
You wake to rain. Not dramatic storm rain, but a soft, persistent drizzle. The kind that beads on cloaks, whispers in hedgerows, and makes old stones smell like memory. It's the kind of morning that doesn't ask much of you. Just to breathe. Maybe sip something warm. And maybe, just maybe, bake something humble. But today is not just any day. It's Pilgrim's Day. At least that's what Brother Felix tells you, pushing a steaming mug of spiced barley tea into your hands before you've even found your shoes. Pilgrim's Day, he says, is when we bake for those who may never return. Well then, no pressure. He explains as you walk to the bakery. Historically, it was the one day a year when monks baked special loaves for passing pilgrims. They'd leave them along the old Roman road that curves past the orchard, tucked into hollow stones, left under cedar trees, or placed in baskets with little notes. But more than food, these loaves carried meaning. Messages, he says, for those too weary to ask. You step into the warm glow of the bakery and find it transformed. Not wildly, monks don't do wild, but intentionally. The table is lined with coarse brown parchment, each sheet inked with a name or title. The walker with no map, the widow who sleeps in shrines, the child with the green ribbon, one who doubts but keeps going. You ask if these are based on real people. Some are, he says. Some were. Some might be. Each loaf today must bear a mark, but not the kind you press on with a tool. These marks must be sculpted into the dough, folded, shaped, woven, like origami made of flour. Brother Rayner shows you how. He takes a rough, rye-heavy dough and braids it. Not tightly, not neatly, just enough to suggest movement. Then he presses 3 small cloves into one end. A journey. Begun, paused, unfinished. You try one yourself. Your fingers, still clumsy, work the dough into a loose spiral. It puffs slightly at the edge. You pinch the middle. Someone nods. It looks like a question. The next few hours are meditative. The bakery fills with the warm, slightly sour scent of rising bread. No one rushes. Each monk works silently, shaping loaves not just as food, but as gestures. Brother Anselm makes a loaf with a hollow center. It's for someone who lost something, he writes on the tag. Another monk forms a thick, square loaf and presses a single hazelnut into its heart. To the pilgrim who carries too much. You glance at a long, narrow loaf shaped like a staff. It's wrapped in a strip of linen. For the one who forgot why they started. The oven huffs and hums. Loaves bake. Their marks darken and become part of the crust. Not decoration, but identity. Once cooled, the loaves are wrapped. Not in cloth or paper, but in leaves. Vine, fig, bay, depending on what grows nearby. Each tied with twine. A small message is slipped inside each bundle. Not a sermon, just a sentence. You are still walking. That counts. Someone prayed for you today. Bread forgives impatience. You help carry the bundles up the path that leads to the old road. The rain has slowed to a mist. Birds hop along the stone wall, unbothered. At each bend in the trail, a loaf is placed. Nestled gently in moss. Set into hollows, balanced on gates. No one says anything as they do this. Because the loaves aren't given to anyone in particular, but they will be found. By someone. Eventually. Brother Tio tells you a legend, possibly made up, of a loaf placed by a monk named Eustace in 1310 that wasn't found until 2 years later by a lost soldier who hadn't spoken in months. He wept when he ate it, then found his voice again. You ask if they marked that story in the loaf library. Of course, Tio says, though some monks say it was just a squirrel who found it first. The walk back is slow. The basket's now empty. The path glistening. And the feeling, quiet satisfaction. You didn't feed the world today. But maybe somewhere, you fed a small ache. Back in your room, you find a parcel on your bed. It's a pilgrim loaf, marked with a single indentation, a thumbprint in the center. No note, no explanation. You don't know who left it, but as you sit on the edge of the cot, breaking off a piece and letting the taste settle on your tongue, you realize something. You've been a pilgrim too, this whole time. Not walking the old road, but wandering through ovens and stamps and flour-dusted stories. And now you're full. Just enough.
It starts with a nibble. Not yours, but Brother Emil's. You spot him one afternoon, hunched over his desk in the scriptorium, the long hall where the monks copy manuscripts with such patient precision that you're convinced some of them must measure time in ink blots. He's supposed to be illuminating a psalm. Instead, he's chewing. Secretly, and not on his quill. You glance closer and catch it. A small golden-brown corner of something tucked beside his inkpot. Bread. Flat. Crisped. A little darker at the edges. Almost like a page. He catches your look and smiles sheepishly. Baking and copying are closer cousins than most think, he whispers, offering you a corner. We scriptor monks nibble more than we should.
The bread, surprisingly, tastes of honey and black pepper. A quiet zing beneath a mellow crust. You blink. It's very literate, you murmur. He chuckles. We call it Scripter's Crumb. He sees your curiosity and motions you to follow him to a narrow alcove behind the library shelves where the scent of parchment meets something warmer, toastier. There, tucked beneath a tapestry of Saint Benedict holding a very disapproving scroll, is a wooden box labeled Scriptorium Panis, bread of the writers. Inside, dozens of dry, leaf-thin bread wafers. Not communion bread, not quite crackers. These are more like edible bookmarks. Some are square, some round, each with a faint mark, burned or stamped or impressed on one side. Brother Emil lifts one and hands it to you. It's crisp, marked with a feather quill and a little crescent moon. For writing after midnight, to help the ink flow and the eyes stay open. Another bears a tiny image of a spilled inkwell, made for the monk who cried after ruining a whole gospel page in 1472. They bake them not in the big ovens, but in a special clay pan kept warm near the scriptorium hearth. The dough is simple: flour, water, a dash of wine-soaked herbs, and occasionally ink. Yes, ink. They call it illumination ash, collected from the soot of burnt mistakes. A poetic touch, if not culinary. You notice a few of the bread pieces have written fragments on them. Single words, short lines, reversed letters. You ask if those are printed. Emil shakes his head. No, those happen when the dough touches parchment by accident. Ink transfers. It's frowned upon. He pauses. We save every one. Of course they do. Each accidental print is catalogued and preserved in a bound volume titled Crumb Glossary of Divine Errors. You leaf through it. Page 27 reads, Thou preparest a table before me, imprinted on rye crisp, 1319. Ink, walnut gall. Outcome, half eaten. Rated 7 out of 10 by Prior Garrett. You ask if anyone else knows about this practice. Emil grins. Most monks think it's superstition, but the scribes know. We believe a crumb can catch inspiration. You spend the afternoon helping him mix a new batch. As he stirs the flour and grinds herbs, he tells of Saint Flora, a scribe in 1105, who reportedly translated 3 entire psalms with nothing but barley ink bread and a broken reed. Scholars debate whether she existed, but we mark her feast day anyway, just in case. Once baked, the new crisps are laid out to cool. Each has a different mark. Tonight, Emil lets you choose one. You press a spoon gently into the warm dough, then drag the end across it in a single motion. A quiet question mark. Perfect, he murmurs. We don't have that one yet. That night, back in your cell, you nibble a scripter's crumb of your own. No great insight arrives, no poem, no illuminated vision of divine geometry. But you sleep deeply, and dream of monks whispering words into loaves, and loaves whispering back in crumbs. You wake in the middle of the night, not startled, just aware. The kind of waking that feels like someone gently tapped your shoulder in a dream and whispered, "It's time." Your window shows a sliver of moonlight crawling across the wall. You should go back to sleep. You probably meant to, but something tugs at your sleeve. Not literally, unless you count intuition wearing a sleepy cowl. You pull on your robe and step into the corridor, quiet as dough on a second rise. The monastery is hushed, but not lifeless. Somewhere, someone is walking. You follow the faintest shuffle of sandals down the hall, past the refectory, past the old statue of St. Tarsus, who always looks slightly surprised, as if the sculptor ran out of patience. Down a narrow stone stairwell, you find a door you haven't opened before. It creaks, dramatically, of course. All monastery doors do after midnight. Inside, candlelight flickers against low arches. You hear a low humming sound, and then you see them. A trio of monks, barely visible in the dim glow, working at a small table beside a bread oven no larger than a wardrobe. One of them looks up and smiles. It's Brother Cedric. "Ah," he says softly, "a traveler between hours." He gestures for you to enter. This, it turns out, is the Bakery of Lost Hours, a place where monks come to bake when they cannot sleep, or when sleep refuses to come to them. Not a formal part of the monastery routine, more like a soft secret known to those who sometimes need quiet work more than rest. The loaves here are different. They're small, round, sourdough mostly, but shaped without uniformity. Some are thick in the middle and taper like teardrops. Others are twisted like question marks or shaped into odd bulging forms like hearts that don't quite know how to beat. These, Brother Cedric says, are loaves for moments we don't plan. He hands you a lump of dough. It's already risen once. Sticky, warm, eager. No marks on these, he says. At least, not intentional ones. Instead, these breads are shaped by how you feel in the moment. Worried, the dough stretches. Sad, it sags a little. Peaceful, it rounds itself into a slow, sleeping moon. The three monks work without talking, but not in silence. They hum. Not melodies exactly, more like long notes that rise and fall together like the wind in tree branches. You find your hands moving with theirs. It's rhythmic, soothing. You press, fold, shape. And your loaf, whatever it becomes, is yours alone. There's a ledger by the oven, an old leather-bound book titled Chronicon Panis Inconventius, the Chronicle of Inconvenient Bread. Each monk who bakes at night writes an entry, not their name, not even the loaf's shape, just the hour and a single sentence. You flip through a few pages. 1:53 a.m. I dreamed I forgot my vows and married a millstone. 3:04 a.m. The wind whispered my brother's name. 2:22 a.m. My faith returned, then left again. I let it. 4:09 a.m. This loaf tastes like the question I've been avoiding. You glance at your own. It's not pretty, but it's honest. You don't quite know what it means, and that, apparently, is the point. Cedric places it in the oven, gently. It'll be ready before matins, he says. You sit with them warm from the heat of the fire, lulled by the crackle of baking crust and the quiet thrum of tired monks who have known both doubt and dough. Eventually, you write your own line in the ledger. 2:48 a.m. I followed the wrong hallway and found what exactly I needed. Your loaf emerges golden, uneven, beautiful. You break off a piece and eat it on the walk back to your cell. It tastes uncertain and kind and more real than anything else you've eaten all week. And before you fall asleep, just as the first bell begins to ring in the distant cloister, you make a mental note. If you ever build a life outside these stone walls, you'll leave room in it for strange loaves baked at stranger hours.
Some mornings feel like questions. Today feels like a riddle, mildly curious, but not in a hurry to be solved. The bells ring slightly off-tempo. Brother Anselm spills a whole basket of dates and just leaves them there for a while, as though hoping the floor will grow sticky enough to absorb his embarrassment. Even the birds outside seem to be chirping in a minor key. You arrive at the bakery to find the ovens cold. This isn't alarming, just unusual. Brother Theo is there, standing by the empty table, looking at something folded in his hands. A note.
He offers it to you without speaking. It's written on rough paper in tidy inked hand. Gone to the cloister beyond, for bread not yet needed. Leave the ovens closed today. Feed the fire with stories instead. The bakers. You look around. Everyone's here, except the bakers. All of them. Not missing, not gone in any panic, just absent. The way a bench is absent after you've leaned on it for years. Theo sighs. They do this sometimes. You blink. They vanish? He nods. Usually for one day, sometimes two. You ask where they go. He shrugs. No one really knows. Some say it's a vow, others say it's part of their rhythm, like dough resting before its final rise. The rest of the monastery continues as usual, but the bakery sits, quiet and still. Brother Miro appears around midday, leaves a single candle lit in the center of the table. Out of respect, he says, and leaves. You ask a few monks if this has happened before. They tell you stories. One recalls a year, 1273 maybe, when the bakers vanished for a week. The monks were forced to barter with the nuns from the convent down the valley. The nuns, apparently, were excellent bakers and smug about it for years after. Another says the bakers once returned wearing robes dyed faintly blue. No one ever figured out why, he whispers. Brother Felix claims he saw one of them in the orchard carving a symbol into a pear tree with a spoon. But when he blinked, the monk was gone. You piece together fragments. A few lines of an old rulebook refer to a quiet tradition of absent presence associated with the bakery. Scholars later called it Dies Panis Absentia, the day of breadlessness. No one agrees on its origin. Some say it's penitence. Others say it's a reminder. Bread may nourish the body, but mystery nourishes the soul. Late in the afternoon, you wander through the empty bakery, just to be near the smell of old flour and smoke-stained walls. On the counter, you find something new. A bowl of flour, a small jug of water, a folded cloth, and a single wooden stamp. You lift it. It's carved with a symbol you've never seen before. A spiral with 2 dots in its center, like an eye half asleep, dreaming of bread. No note, no signature, just quiet invitation. You mix the flour and water. No yeast, no salt, no herbs. Just a sticky, hesitant dough. You shape it into a disc, mark it gently with the strange stamp, and place it back on the counter under the cloth. There's no fire to bake it, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe it's enough to shape something and wait. As evening nears, you pass by the bakery one more time. You peek inside. The dough is gone. So is the stamp. But someone has left a new note in its place. Just a single sentence. You remembered. And perhaps that's what this whole thing was about. Not answers, but the kindness of not knowing.
Some stories begin with flour. This one begins with silence. You're in the library, curled into one of those uncomfortable but historically authentic wooden chairs. You're flipping through a book on Cistercian baking methods when a slip of parchment falls out. It's tiny, folded, yellowed at the edges. You unfold it carefully. There are no ingredients, no measurements, just 4 lines, handwritten in faded brown ink. Begin with what is missing. Knead with what cannot be named. Mark it with nothing.
Bake it without heat. You blink. Huh. A monastery riddle. Or perhaps a recipe for disappointment. Still, curiosity has a way of proving stubborn in sacred spaces. You carry the note to Brother Matthias, the monastery's librarian and unofficial translator of things lost to time. He squints at it, nods slowly, and says, "Ah, yes, that's the recipe with no ingredients." Of course it is. You wait for him to explain. He doesn't. He just smiles like someone who once tried to explain metaphysics to a goose and has since learned better. You'll have to follow it, not interpret it. Right. Fine. You return to the bakery, note in hand, and try to follow the first line. Begin with what is missing. So, you begin with nothing. You stand at the counter, hands empty. Nothing in the bowl, nothing on the scale, nothing rising, nothing falling, just absence. It's surprisingly uncomfortable. You start noticing everything else. The scuff on the table, the faint crack in the stone floor, the exact hum of wind against the wooden shutter, the way your breath sounds like it's been waiting for someone to listen to it. The second line, knead with what cannot be named. You close your eyes and pretend your hands are kneading dough. They move in air, slow presses, folds, imaginary shaping. You think of memories that have no words. The way homesickness feels when you're not sure what home is anymore. The taste of something you loved as a child, now forgotten, but still mourned. The weight of kindness you didn't deserve but accepted anyway. You need those, gently, respectfully, as if they might fall apart. The third line, mark it with nothing. You smile at that one. And so, you mark your invisible dough with invisible meaning. A breath, a pause, the space between sentences. The fourth line, bake it without heat. Now this is either impossible or brilliant. You leave the invisible dough sitting on the table, and you wait. Not because anything will rise, but because some things, some truths, some feelings, some longings are slow to change, even when they're not there. Later, Brother Matthias finds you still sitting there. He sits beside you, sets down 2 mugs of warm something. You're not sure what's in it. It tastes like a root that once considered being a berry. You hand him the parchment. He tucks it away in his robe. "We only ever keep 1 copy of that," he says. "When someone finds it, we let it go. Until it returns again." You ask him what it means. He sips his drink. "Some say it's a reminder," he murmurs, "that not all nourishment is physical, that some bread is spiritual. Some loaves are questions." You lean back. Let that sit. The oven stays cold today. The bakery is empty. But still, somehow, something was made.
The ovens are warm again. Not hot, not rushed, just warm, like the first mug of tea after an awkward conversation that ended well enough.
You step into the bakery and are greeted by the faint scent of cloves, thyme, and yesterday's stories still lingering in the rafters. The bakers have returned. No fanfare, no explanations. They're already at work, as if nothing unusual ever happened, as if vanishing was as ordinary as flour dust on a friar's sleeve. Brother Hugo nods to you with a sleepy smile. "Morning," he says, holding up a loaf shaped like a spiral inside a square. "We're marking remembrance today." You ask what that means. He thinks for a moment. "Well," he says, "sometimes a mark is made to tell the future, sometimes to claim a moment, and sometimes, just sometimes, it's how we remember what time did to us." You begin your own batch. You know the rhythm by now. Flour, water, patience, heat, and something a little older than all of those. As your dough rests, you look around at the walls. You've never really studied them closely. That's when you notice the faint carvings in the stone. Everywhere. Little notches, scratches, spirals, lines like loaves left in charcoal. They're marks, Hugo says from behind you, of bakers who passed through. Most never signed anything, just left symbols. One resembles a leaf falling upward. Another looks like a teacup with a crack through it. One is just a single, perfect dot. Scholars, you're told, tried to document them, failed miserably. They changed too much, Hugo says. New ones appear, old ones fade. Some seem to move. You touch one that looks like the letter O broken open on the right. He chuckles. That one's been debated for years. Some think it's a vow. Others think it's just a bad circle. When your loaf is ready, you consider the mark you want to make. You think of all you've learned, of the bell and the silent dough, the night bakers, the scripter's crumb, the day without fire, the invisible recipe. And so you mark your loaf with the simplest thing you can think of. A thumbprint, just one, yours, slightly to the left, slightly imperfect. No one else has that mark. Later, you eat that loaf by the window, watching the light move across the stone walls. You see the marks glowing faintly, and you realize this has always been about memory. Not remembering history like dates in a book, but like smells that return in winter, or like crusts you didn't think to save, or crumbs that whisper back to you in dreams.
Final wind down, the soft fade to sleep. Now the ovens are quiet, the flour sacks tied, the last mark made. You leave the bakery slowly, letting the stone corridor stretch around you like an old blanket aired in sunlight. Your steps are soft. The air is still warm with spice and ash, and your hands smell faintly of yeast. Outside, the wind is low, curling around the chapel roof like a lullaby half-hummed by the earth. A bell chimes far off, not for prayer this time, but just to remind the hour that it exists. You pass the pear tree, where a spoon once scratched something into the bark. Its leaves shimmer like folded parchment. The moon rises lazily, hanging like an unbaked loaf on a silver tray of stars. Above you, the sky forgets to rush. And maybe you do too. Maybe you forget the urgency, the clocks, the noise, the endless turning of everything faster than it needs to be. You breathe slowly. And remember, bread does not rush, and neither should you. So let the world rise around you. Let time proof in its own quiet bowl.
Let your body soften like dough left to rest. The marks are still there, in loaves, in stone, in you. Sleep now. The ovens are closed. The fire has told its last story. And you have earned this gentle silence. Good night.